Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, June 3rd. This is a Moscow City Regular Council meeting. Thank you all for being here. Gina?
Good evening, everybody. Happy June. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gina. With that, we will move on to the consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Catherine to approve the consent agenda as is. I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay. Item number 2, staff recognition report. Gary Reedner, do you have anything for us this evening, sir?
We have no staff recognition tonight, Your Honor.
Okay, item number 3, which is mayor's appointments. I have none of those this evening as well. But item number 4, public comment and mayor's response period. We allow time each meeting for this, for folks to get up and tell us what's on their mind, as long as it's not on this evening's agenda or something that is in front of Board of Adjustment and/or Planning and Zoning. We'll give you 3 minutes. Please come up and state your name and your concerns. Well, okay. We'll have a moment of silence. We will move on to a Citizens Commission report. Transportation Commission, we have Tyler Palmer and Michael Kite here this evening with us. So Tyler, you had the podium, sir.
All right, thank you. I'm really happy to be here on a beautiful June evening. I appreciate the time, Mayor and Council, for us to talk about something really important, which is the Transportation Commission. One of the things that I really have loved about working for the City of Moscow is that we have very strong citizen commissions. I think that when you have a community like Moscow where you have so many people who want to be involved and a lot of people who have really interesting backgrounds and expertise, citizen commissions are a great way for us to keep our finger on the pulse of what our community wants to see out of the different services that the city provides. Transportation is one in particular that I think that often we don't recognize the impact that it has on our lives. It's something that becomes very mundane and we interact with it all the time. But when you think about very small transportation decisions and what a huge impact they actually have on the way that we live and on the way that a community feels, you know, the transportation system impacts how long your commute is, which often impacts the mood that you have when you get where you're going. The different modes of transportation impact your health, impact your ability to interact with your friends and neighbors. I think in Moscow we have a very poignant example when you look at our couplet. You know, I didn't live here pre-couplet, but I know many of you did. And if you think about what makes Moscow Moscow and what people would list as their favorite things about Moscow, often they'll say the downtown. And what they mean by that is between the couplets. And why is that a special place? Like, it's entirely transportation related. It is because we took what was a car-centric place and we made it a human-centric place in the appropriate place. And we created a little bubble where people could walk and bike, and there could be sidewalk cafes, and it's a place where people can get to. You know, every one of our interactions is entirely dependent on a transportation system. And this year in particular, we've had some very large and very impactful transportation decisions that have been made by the city, and we really appreciate very much our Transportation Commission and their help in that process as they help us try to understand what it is that the members of our community want to see from our transportation system and keep that in alignment with the actions that we take. So with that, we're super happy to have Michael Kite here with us. Michael's been a resident of Moscow for 33 years. He taught transportation at the University of Idaho for 30 years, and he was the director of UI's Transportation Center before retiring. And so we're very happy to have him as the chair of our Transportation Commission. And with that, I will turn the time to him and let him explain what we've been up to.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. After that introduction, I don't really have much to say.
Well, he did kind of go off a little bit there.
He did. It's not my nature. Well, I had my first job in transportation 50 years ago this summer, working with the City of LA Traffic Department. The only thing that says about me is that I'm really getting pretty old. So I'd like to say before I begin that this has really been a pleasure for me to work with city staff, Tyler and Bill and others, And we have talks that are not just about transportation, about life, and which always gets back to transportation, because that's the only thing that's really important, I think, in life. But I'd like to give you kind of a quick overview of what we've done in the last year and a half. Guess first is to figure out how to, see if I get the right, Tyler.
So that one will advance it right there.
Okay, good. So first to quickly summarize what the commission does, this is on the website. Basically, provide advice and recommendations regarding the system of transportation within the city. Also to recommend policies and programs to implement the comprehensive plan. And then finally, advise on transportation needs of future city development. And I'll touch a little bit on that a little bit later in the presentation. Commission includes 9 members, of which I've been privileged to serve as chair since January. My report's going to consist of 4 main parts. The top 4 bullets are the things that we really spent a lot of time on in the last year, and the last 3 I'll touch on a little bit towards the end. So much of our time in the last year and a half has been spent on the 3rd Street corridor. And the 3rd Street corridor has been a subject that the council has talked a lot about, thought a lot about, a lot of discussion in the public. And basically, in terms of the commission activities, after a number of months, a special task force identified several traffic calming measures for the 3rd Street corridor in anticipation of a full vehicle ped bike bridge. Actually, it's interesting, even with that full bridge not going in, a number of those traffic calming items have actually been implemented, including a lower speed limit down to 25 miles an hour for the entire corridor, and a variety of other pedestrian-related improvements, a new school zone signing, and the most interesting speed bump I think that any of us have ever experienced. And I think that's challenging to a number of us to remember that it's still there. Council approved in February 2018 what was called Plan C that came out of the task force's work. The council adopted the recommendations from Alta Planning for a separated bike lane in June 2018, including a request to Idaho Transportation Department to make changes on Washington Street on the western part between 3rd and 2nd. The commission also recommended an alignment of the bike pedestrian bridge, bike pedestrian bridge, which is now actually in place. And if you didn't have a chance to be out there on that very interesting morning a week or so ago, Tyler did get coffee, though I think he didn't bring cookies, which he had promised me to bring. Donuts, that's right. And then finally, the commission looked at, as a result of ITD's not coming to the city's recommendation of the changes in the western part of Washington Street, to terminate the bike lane at Washington, regardless of whether ITD ever approves those changes on the Washington Street part. That was a major set of activities. And I say major set of activities because this has probably been on the agenda most months in the last year and a half. Transportation Commission has noted the increase in pedestrian activity in the South Couplet area, which I like to call the intersection of US 95 and State Highway 8, which for traffic engineers' interest is one of the most interesting intersections in town in terms of traffic signal operations, but that's a whole other story that I won't go into a lecture on. I almost felt a lecture coming on here, but I'll try to stay away from that. Obviously, with the Identity Apartments, Gritman's new parking lot on the south side of US 95, or the Jackson Street extension, the new WAMI building, and a number of other new developments. There's a lot more people at that intersection. And if you were around 20 years ago when that intersection first went in, there was not a lot there. And from ITD's perspective, it's an intersection to move vehicles through, and oh, by the way, maybe there's people as well. Well, people are there now, and it's growing in terms of pedestrian activity. It will become even more so in the next several years as additional development happens. The commission looked at this last fall and recommended with, I think the final recommendation was from the commission in February, that new crosswalks be put in on the south and west part of the intersection. If you walk through there or driven through there, you know there's crosswalks on two sides, not on the other two sides, and we think that that's important to do that. But again, this is going to be a big deal for ITD to swallow because it's not about moving vehicles. It's about extra pedestrian time that will take time away from vehicles, and so that balance for them is a tough one. We're also encouraging that there be some study between the intersection further to the west to College, where because of the new parking lot, people have a funny way of crossing mid-block. We always want to cross in the closest area. So again, there's a need to do something, whether it's a crosswalk, what effectively is the extension of Main Street there, or some other aid for pedestrian crossing. We think that that's an important thing for staff and for the commission and at some point for council to look at as well. A couple of other things to note. We've done a number of things with city staff, reviewed the mobility chapter of the comp plan, reviewed the proposed downtown medical services district last year, looked at a new development on Almond, changing the traffic pattern in that area in response to requests from the developer, and also provided recommendations regarding the bike share program, which I think is going to start in August, and the hub locations, and I believe there's 10 that will be a part of that program. And I'm very much looking forward to trying out the e-bikes, which Tyler assures me can make it up to 6th Street Hill. For someone my age, that would be assistance that I would gladly look forward to. We've also worked with other agencies on transportation-related matters. There was a task force formed from the commission that looked at the smart transit routes and service hour revisions that were implemented by Smart Transit last year, and it was good that the commission had a chance to take a look at those and the impact on the city in terms of providing additional service. We also reviewed a proposal from University of Idaho on changes to their on-street parking program last year. We've also started something called continuing education. I guess this is a prize from a former educator that we would have something like this. But it's something that we're trying to take time each meeting to learn about something new. So, for example, that last slide lists some of the organizations or traffic handbooks, at least in a very peripheral manner. The commission has a chance to learn more about some of the information that's in various things, including the fact that there's a tie for the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which I'm wearing tonight, as well as other organizations. We had a really interesting two-day workshop in May. It was put on by a consultant from Boise on walkability. And as someone who's thought about traffic flow for a long time, this was really an illuminating session for me to get this different perspective of bikes and peds first. Now, I've always thought I've had a sensitivity to that. I'm a bike rider, I'm a pedestrian, but this was awareness on steroids. Ann was there for part of the session. A number of city staff participated, as well as a number of members from the community. We actually got out and walked around the city to look at the ideas that the folks had suggested and see how they might be implemented. We also received a really interesting presentation as a part of the Commission's learning experiences from Bill Belknap last month on various aspects related to land use planning and transportation. And this is a big deal. To me, these two things are really coupled, and a chance for the commission to begin thinking more in depth about how we do this whole process of land use planning and land use review. And I'm really grateful for all the information that Bill presented. And I was really surprised, I guess, that somebody could really talk longer than me about transportation, but Bill did a great job, and apparently he had a bunch of other slides we wanted to go through, but the clock ran out. But we really appreciated Bill's information that was presented. Whoops. I just pressed the wrong button there. Future commission priorities. So last year, under the previous chair, Ben Calabretta, we had a visioning session, or a session in which we tried to sort of understand what our own issues and priorities were, and some of those in the city as well. That continued in February and March of this year. We did a formal survey of commission members, city staff who participates in the commission, and our council liaison on future transportation project priorities, or transportation issues and priorities, I guess you might say. We did a survey of that group, and there were 6 priorities that were identified, and I want to just summarize those really briefly for you. These are in order in terms of the number of votes that were received from the various commission members and others as well. First in the list was land use effects. And one of the things that I'm still, as a fairly new chair, trying to get a handle on is how this issue of land use and transportation works as far as the city's processes go. And I still don't have any good answers at this point, but it's a really, really important thing, I think, that we, as a commission, try to get a better handle on. Priority number 2, e-scooters and e-bikes. They're coming, they will be coming in greater mass. If you've looked at around the country, cities have experimented with and have programs that are working quite well for e-bikes and for e-scooters. I think the issue of, or one in, that I think is really important in particular, has to do with safety of e-scooters. I've observed a number of times of people riding scooters down Main Street in traffic, no helmet, not looking around for people like me that are going to back out and maybe come close to a collision. And I'm just sort of interested to see how all this is going to go. I think we have a lot to learn in terms of what sort of regulations, what sort of things should be allowed in terms of e-scooters and possibly even e-bikes. Priority number 3, connections outside the community. We used to have a service between Moscow and Pullman that was jointly funded by the city, the universities, and you can argue about whether it was a success or not, but I think the interest sort of waned at some point. And a number of us feel that those discussions should be initiated again. How that happens, who's involved, those are big questions. Money is a big question. But that connection that seems lacking, that we have 2 major universities, 2 major cities that are as close as we are, and you have to drive to get back and forth, or ride your bike, but there's not a lot of us who do that during the wintertime. Other priorities, downtown parking. This is probably higher on your list than it showed in the survey, but basically the question I guess one might ask is what's next in terms of looking at downtown parking and how that gets addressed. Are the issues real? Are they perceived? There's probably a combination of both of those. Priority number 5, the Moscow Mobility Plan. Is it time to review and revisit that plan, which was approved in 2014? What's changed since then that might drive a review of that plan? Then finally, the 6th priority is climate change. And I'm sure that you would agree that this is a real struggle of how to take these large-scale issues and sort of bring them back down to the city of Moscow, and in particular in transportation. And how do we think about global warming or climate change when we make these day-to-day decisions on approving land use, approving transportation changes? I think there's a link there. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it's important, I think, that we continue to think about this and talk about it. Other commission priorities that were listed that didn't get a lot of votes, but I think at least are worthwhile including here: sidewalks, parking limits, and placement of streetlights, all important in their own right. Finally, I'll close with other issues. These are really in the form of questions. What are city council transportation priorities in the coming year that would be good for the commission to know about? Second issue, I think for me, partly as being new on the commission and new as chair, how best to interact with other city commissions, obvious connections to planning and zoning and to pathways. And I would also put Transportation Commission on that, surprisingly, because I think the question is, what is it that we really do? What is it that we should be doing? And then there's finally the unknowns. Stuff's going to come up. What issues are those? And as soon as we know about them, and we'll try to deal with them as best we can. So I think that's about it for formal presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions and appreciate the time to come and talk about an issue that I've cared about for a long time and care about in a different way now in this context of serving on the Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Questions for Michael?
Sure.
Catherine?
Thank you for stepping up to be chair. And I thought the man's name was Mark Fenton that did the walkability tour, because he did a tour in Boise when down at the Association of Idaho Cities in 2017, I think, because I went on it. But I couldn't remember his name, and I was wondering if you remember his name.
It's a different guy, I think. Tyler, you can.
Oh, a different person. Chris Stanley?
I just was blown away by this presentation. If we could get them back up again and get more people involved, it just was, as I said, just sort of changed my whole perspective.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me at my age to change my perspective on anything.
I got one.
Arthur?
Has the commission done any discussions yet or thoughts about an undercross at Highways 8 and 95, similar to the undercross at White Steiner Highway 8?
Yes, it has discussed it. The staff has raised that. We know that a preliminary study has been done. I love the White Avenue underpass, by the way. That's amazing. As that relates to the 895 intersection, I think that having that underpass would be really a good thing. It doesn't completely solve that pedestrian crossing issue because it's only on one approach. And there's going to be some days of the year, as we found out with this underpass, that either water or snow are going to keep people out. But I think it's really a great thing, and I hope that continues on the process of looking for funding and getting on the construction schedule. I think it's maybe 2 years away, 3 years away?
Probably 2022, 2023. We intend to make a grant application in this fall's Transportation Alternatives Program round. That'll be coming up here in December. Typically, those projects from time of application and award are programmed 3 to 4 years out in advance.
And the idea behind that is to continue to plug away, try to keep the pipeline going, Michael, so that we can, it's ongoing for us. Catherine, or
Yeah.
Brandy, do you have something
have a
you want to ask?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, do you think the Transportation Commission has a role in providing input or assisting in some way with data gathering along with these upcoming changes to the 3rd Street corridor to see the effects of for example, the protected bike lanes, so we have some tangible before and after data that could be valuable?
It's a great question, and my answer is yes. And I think the question to ask before that are, what are the measures to be used to say, is this a success or not? And so I think thinking that out first and establishing a list of measures then leads to the collection of data. So yes, I think it's very important to have that established if we can before the bike lanes are put in, so we can say, are they working or not working?
Right, and I'm not clear on where it first starts, if you're awaiting some direction or if we're awaiting your recommendation or staff's, I'm not sure. So maybe that's just something to
Yeah.
continue in the discussions with the commission, with all this ongoing work you're doing with the corridor.
My sense is I oftentimes don't wait, and maybe I should, for direction. Sometimes I step off the cliff, but I think it's definitely an item that the commission needs to get on the agenda and
That's great.
talk about. Thank you.
Catherine?
Yeah, I think Ann wanted to say something too.
If I
Go ahead,
could.
Dan.
Very grateful to you all for serving on the commission. I think you do a wonderful job. I wanted to follow up on the walkability workshop because I'm wondering if there were any specific outcomes or any planned discussion that will address some of the things that they brought up with us.
I think that Tyler had an idea of bringing them back up. Maybe you
Yeah.
want to speak to that, because I think it was really an interesting
Yeah, we had a really great interaction, and they were very. I mean, that training itself initiated because they were up here doing some work with the University of Idaho, and through that process did some interviews and looked at a little bit of the city of Moscow system, and they enjoyed the interaction and liked what they saw about a lot of the things Moscow was doing, and that's what made them decide they had some remaining grant funding, and they asked if we would want them to use it up here, and so we put that on, and they offered while they were here. They have some funds to come up and do some subsequent work, public education in particular, and so we plan on engaging them in that process, specifically with the public outreach and education about the use of the separated bike lane. And so that's something that we really are looking forward to getting them back up and coming up with a strategy to start the outreach and the education about that process. And so, yeah, we definitely will have some follow-up, and then we've had some follow-up discussions with the school district as well about some of the items that they saw, specifically the Mountain View and D intersection, and then some of the things that we've looked at on the south couplet. So, yeah, I anticipate continued work from that workshop.
That's wonderful. I didn't realize it was funded by them as well, that we didn't put that on.
Yeah, they offered that. That was
Yeah.
funded through some grant money that they had.
That's great. Do you have an idea of a time frame for when they're looking at coming back, or when we'd like them to?
We've been emailing back and forth. I suspect it'll probably be this fall into this winter, because we want to make sure we have plenty of ramp-up time and do a lot of education for a rollout, early summer next year of the separated bike lane is what we'd hope to see. We'll be bringing forth a proposal to the city council about funding for that component shortly. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Catherine, you have something?
Yeah. I appreciate that, the questions you had about, like, what should your commission do and all that kind of stuff, and also, like, what is your relationship with the other commissions? And I wondered, also, the relationship with Smart Transit, with the Transportation Commission.
Well, I think that they being Smart Transit, have come to the commission in the past, with their route and service options that they were looking at last year. And I'm not sure if they did it at the city's request or whether just on their own. We don't have a formal relationship in the sense of people from Smart Transit don't attend the commission meeting. But I had a discussion with Gary Reedner a month or so ago, and Gary showed me, really an education for me, the list of people to serve ex officio on the commission. And there was, I think, 20 people that were included on that list, not specific names of people, but organizations that they would represent. Smart Transit was established, I think, after that, but I think it's good to revisit that list in general. Right now, I think our only ex officio officer that is a regular attender is someone from Idaho Transportation Department. But I think certainly inviting Smart Transit for more formal participation would be a good thing. So.
Yeah.
Other questions for Mike?
And one more thing about climate change. I know that you all put it as a priority, but how did it come up as a question, or how did it become a priority?
I think the people on the commission, me and others, just sort of developed a list of things that we thought might be important. We did the survey with help from Bill and his staff, and basically it came out fairly low on the list in terms of priorities, because we only had to think about 8 or 9 altogether. But it's one that I think is critical. How that gets put into regular, operation of a commission, or how it gets applied to transportation projects is still an open question to me, but I think is one that would be worthwhile discussing some more.
Right, thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael. Very good.
Great.
Excellent presentation. Thank you for your work on the Transportation Commission, which is a very important commission for us.
Thank you for the time tonight. I appreciate
You
it.
bet. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item number 7, public hearing, rezone located at east of the intersection of Southview Avenue and Alice Street. Michael Ray is here doing the presentation. Hello, Mike.
Evening, Your Honor, council members. So before you tonight, we have a rezone request from Thompson Development for an area of land located directly east of Indian Hills 9th subdivision, which ended up bringing in Alice and Southview Avenue to an intersection. And it's a 38,558 square foot area. And it was, like I mentioned before, recently accessed via Indian Hills 9th subdivision, which was developed earlier this year. requesting rezone from the current designation of farm ranch and outdoor recreation to our low-density, single-family residential zone, which is the R1 designation. So this is your property, highlighted in red in the center of your screen. A little bit of an outdated map, so this was from earlier last year, and so like I mentioned, that development ended up putting in infrastructure which extended Southview Avenue to intersect with Alice Street here. This was previously the parkland dedication, which ended up being Harvest Park, or Edible Forest Park. It got relocated, but still hasn't been updated on the assessor's maps we get from the county, and so that's the reason for those property lines. And then this would be the extension of Powers, so we have nursery further here to the left of your screen, and this would be Palouse Prairie Charter School, which is almost fully constructed currently. So this gives you an idea of the subdivision as it was extended for Indian Hills 9th. You can see the Southview alignment, which comes in here from the west, ends up intersecting with Alice Street here with a T intersection. And then there's a property further to the south there as a flagpole lot. Looking at the comp plan designation, currently designated as auto urban residential, as well as all of the surrounding properties. You can see the Grove Campus Crest development to the left of your screen. That's high density residential. And then to the south, the properties south of Palouse River Drive, auto urban commercial. And then we've got pockets of high-density residential further to the north with Northwood Drive and some portions of Indian Hills Drive. So looking at auto-urban residential in the comp plan, primarily single-family. Those lots range from 7 to 11,000 square feet in size, primarily isolated from surrounding uses, which may require residents to rely more on automobile transportation. And then it's anticipated to be developed at low, moderate density residential uses. Points is at densities between 3 to 6 units per acre, and it could include a mixture of residential development, so it could be detached single-family or attached single-family with twin homes, townhouses. And then it points us to the appropriate zoning designations, which are the R1, R2, and R3 zones. And that's to highlight or include a mixture of attached and detached dwellings where appropriate within the subdivision. So this is the current zoning configuration in the area. So Indian Hills Drive, so the Indian Hills additions are primarily R1 to the north. That portion, Indian Hills 9th, was rezoned, I think last year, as R2. Palouse Prairie Charter School remained farm ranch. And then you have a older homestead agricultural property here that's farm ranch as well. And then the larger piece where the proposed rezone is being proposed tonight is going to go R1 from the current farm ranch designation. So looking at the R1 zone in our zoning code, single family, residential, low density. It's appropriate in the following circumstances where single family dwellings predominate in the area. And then the physical character of the area does not lend it to more intense development by virtue of irregular topography, restricted access, division of land into subdivision lots of a greater than the minimum lot size required by the zoning code, or the application of the comprehensive plan policies to the land in question. Looking at the existing utilities and street configuration, so there is water and sewer which were extended via Indian Hills 9th subdivision. They are of adequate capacity for any proposed development that is expected to occur on this property. And then Southview and Alice Streets are both local neighborhood streets, which means they're 36 feet in width for paving, include curb gutter sidewalks on both sides of the street. And the applicant did conduct a neighborhood meeting. Everybody within 600 feet was notified, and that occurred on April 8th, 2019, to discuss the proposal. And then the commission conducted the public hearing on May 8th of this year and recommended approval of the rezone request with no conditions. So staff's recommendation is conduct the public hearing in consideration of testimony received, approve the zoning ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary. And then also adopt P&Z's reason statement of relevant criteria and standards. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Michael before we open the public hearing? Thank you, Mike. We will call on you if we need you. With that, I will open the public hearing and hear from the applicant, please.
Let's see, Garrett Thompson, 1024 Pinecrest Road. One quick correction, at the beginning of Mike's presentation, he said Thompson Development. Unfortunately, tonight, I am putting on my Thompson Family Limited Partnership hat, so just a little correction there. We would just ask for you to approve this. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I can try to answer them for you, but yeah.
Thank you. With that, I would take any testimony in favor of this rezone. Or at this time, I would take any testimony. Well, with that, I'll stop the public hearing and turn it over to council for deliberation. Jim?
It seems to me that this requested rezone is in line with the adjacent uses, and I would tend to agree with the committee and planning and zoning that we should go ahead and approve. And therefore, I'll move to approve the proposed zoning ordinance under suspension of the rules and requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that be read by title and published by summary, and that we adopt the Planning and Zoning Commission reasoned statement of relevant criteria.
Second. Both of them.
Okay, it's all in one motion, and we got a motion by Jim and a second by Gina to approve the proposed zoning ordinance and the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, that they be read by title and published by summary, and adopt the planning and zoning's reasoned statement of relevant criteria. Further discussion before I call a roll. I'll start with Catherine.
Aye.
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 Okay, and that passes right on. Okay, with that, we will move to item number 7, which is a public hearing on tiny home
Your Honor, you
construction.
need to read the
Oh,
ordinance.
sorry. Forgot, folks, I do have an ordinance that I must read. And this is ordinance 2009-4. Okay, ordinance number 2019-04, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the zoning of an approximately 38,559 square feet of property described in Section 1 of this ordinance as low-density, single-family residential R1, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from and after its passage, approval, and publication, according to law. And now with that, we will move on to item number 7, which is our tiny home construction ordinance, and we've got Justin Goodwin with us this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. The document you have before you is an amendment to Title VII, Chapter 16 of the City Code, which is the construction regulations. Back in 2018, the state of Idaho adopted the tiny home ordinance, which is amending the International Residential Code by the addition of Appendix R. So today, we, excuse me, let me back up, sorry. So in 2018, fall of 2018, we got the Building Code Advisory Committee together, met, had one meeting. During that meeting, we discussed in length the tiny home ordinance, and we came up with a couple amendments, and one of them was lofts, and we deliberated extensively on that, and we would like to limit lofts to a maximum of 200 square feet. Reason being was they felt that a person could come in and they can get really creative when they're building a tiny home, and basically the main floor would be 400 square feet. They would throw a 400 square foot loft on there, and now they would have an 800 square foot tiny home. And they would be able to take the tiny home amendments that are in there, like your hallways would be smaller, ceiling heights are less, stairways, things like that. Other than that, they were pretty happy with the document, so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Justin? This was heard in front of the Administrative Committee on May the 28th as well. Okay, well, Justin, we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing and see what we have, and we may call you back. With that, I will open the public hearing at 7:39 and I will take any testimony on this. If you got something you'd like to say, we'll give you 3 minutes. Please give us your name and your address and let us know what you think. Got to share with you, this is back-to-back public hearings, and I don't know if I've ever, in my career as the mayor, have had back-to-back public hearings with no testimony. So with that, there we have it. We will close the public hearing at 7:40 and turn it over to deliberation of the council. Art?
Yeah, I was at the Building Advisory Code meeting, and it was discussed at considerable length, and the only adjustment to the Idaho code was the fact that it establishes 400 square feet as the base floor for a tiny home, but then the committee got to thinking that, geez, what about the loft? You could get really creative and slap an 800 square foot loft on top of a 400 square foot main floor, and that defeats the whole purpose of a tiny home, plus leading to some interesting architecture. So the clever folks on the committee spotted that and said, no, 200 square feet there. And if you're going to have a tiny home, that means tiny hallways, tiny ladders, get to the loft, things like that. And it was a good step in the right direction to amend all of that. So there was a lot of discussion, and it made really good sense, and I think makes for a better ordinance than what was adopted by the state.
And there was a minimum loft size too, wasn't there?
35.
35 square feet, yes, that is correct.
So that people would use it for a bedroom. That
Yeah,
was the goal.
yeah. Normally, if you do any research on tiny homes, that's usually where the bedroom's at, it's up in the loft.
Yeah, I did have a lot of questions about that at that meeting, and then when I looked into it a little bit later, I had a better vision of that loft space, and typically the clearance is not so you would even necessarily be able to stand up there, and it doesn't tend to encompass the entire floor, but
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and during the last in front of the committee, I did not bring up that lofts are meant to be open to the floor below. So I think there was some miscommunication, thinking there could be a second story or a second floor on there. So.
right, so that took care of all the questions I had
Yeah.
earlier of a total of 600 and being able to
Yeah.
accommodate that in different ways. But it makes, and I think that what has been recommended makes sense to me.
So with that, we can move, yeah?
You can do whatever you
Move to
want.
approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine and a second by Art to approve the ordinance under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it be read by title and published by summary. Do we have further discussion? And I will start to roll with you again, Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, now this time I will not forget to read this resolution, or this ordinance, which is ordinance number 20-01905. An ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code, Title 7, Chapter 16, providing for the adoption and amendment of 2012 International Residential Code Appendix R pertaining to the development standards for tiny homes. Providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, approving the publication of a summary of the ordinance with the full text available at City Hall, providing for a waiver of the reading rules, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a tiny home ordinance now. So and actually, I got to make a comment on that. That's something that's been in the works for a long, long time, and I'm actually glad to see it happen. It's something I think a lot of communities will see as we go along, and it should be exciting to see how we go further with this. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item number 8, which is beer garden request for the cornhole extravaganza resolution. Dwight, you have the floor.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening. We have local business Tapped, who is sponsoring a cornhole extravaganza. And this particular event will have tournaments, games, food, music, things like that. The proceeds will go to a local charity of Palouse Cares Network. And when I'm done here, I have Brendan Allen. He's the organizer of this, if you have any more questions. And but basically, this is a community event, and it's to be held on June 22nd from noon to 6 at East City Park. They are requesting a small beer garden. You can compare it to basically what we had at the Ren Fair. So it's small, and in this particular case, the Moscow Police Department recommended that they have 2 police officers there for security the first year, and that's pretty typical. And then we see what happens, and then make a different recommendation next year likely, so they can use private security a little cheaper. The police chief has reviewed this and has no issues with it. This is also run through our city attorney. And through staff, we don't have any issues with it. It should be a good time. And with that, the map is in your packet.
Well, Dwight, let's
for
get
questions.
Brandon Allen up here and let him talk
All
a
right.
little bit and see what he's got to say about this. Come on up, Brandon. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, City Council members, community members, my name is Brandon Allen. I reside at 624 North Mountain View Road. And we're very, very excited for the opportunity to host Moscow's first annual Cornhole Extravaganza. This is going to be hopefully an annual event that we can carry forward as a fundraiser to different charities throughout the city of Moscow. And what we're trying to do here is really strengthen community ties, provide an outlet for families to come together over a growing sport, which is cornhole, the backyard yard game, and we figured that this would be a wonderful outlet for families to come, partake, have fun. We'll have food trucks, face painting, live music, bounce houses, and cornhole. And to just give a big shout out, Moscow Building Supply has been extremely generous in their donation towards this event. They've actually donated 20 prefabricated boards that we're going to be hosting a kids educational woodworking workshop this Sunday at Moscow Building Supply to teach the kids that come how to put these together safely, learn about power tools and woodworking, and really are trying to provide every opportunity to turn this into an educational and family opportunity and event. So I will stand for any questions.
Questions for Brandon? And this was seen as heard in front of the administrative committee on May 28th as well.
We did ask him some questions about the organization because we didn't have any information, and he definitely gave us a lot of information. I was just curious, the Palouse Cares Network, is that who was part of the fund drive? I mean, not the food drive over the weekend? Same network?
Palouse Cares is different than Palouse Care Network. We actually have the Palouse Care Network CEO, Michelle Ellenwood, here that can answer any questions about the organization if you have specifics, as I'm not directly affiliated.
Yeah, no direct questions.
Okay. Thank you, council member.
Okay, Brandon, well, thank you. We'll go ahead and let the council deliberate. What we're looking at is approval of this beer garden, but also in the attached resolution that goes along with it, folks.
Well, it seems very much in line with other activities that we've approved in the past, so I move approval of the beer garden request by TAP for the Moscow Annual Cornhole Extravaganza event to be held on June 22nd at East City Park.
Second.
And the attached resolution goes, with Arthur, and the attached resolution.
Yes,
goes with
and the
that as well.
resolution as well.
And Jim was the one that beats Ann on the second, or which one was it?
Oh, there was some from that side.
Okay, we'll put Ann in there then, Jim. Jim's very kind. Could we have a motion by Art and a second by Ann to approve the beer garden request by TAP for Moscow's annual Cornhole Extravaganza event to be held on June 22nd, 2019 at East City Park, and the attached resolution is part of that as well. Catherine, I'll start to roll with you.
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Congratulations, we have our first annual cornhole extravaganza, so I'm kind of interested in seeing how this goes. And one comment I'll say is that over the years, my years as a mayor, and even that way back and when I was on city council, we'd have different resolutions like this would come up, and every time we used a new event, we always had the city police, 2 of them and stuff, and we have never had a problem with one of these events. And so I'm looking forward to what you guys can do, so congratulations. Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 9, which is 1912, second floor development plan proposal authorization to apply to the Board of Adjustment. We got Dwight Curtis and Jenny Kostra, the most energetic lady in town. So we will go from there. So Dwight, take it all.
Okay, well, thank you. And like the mayor just said, well, the 1912 Center is been being renovated ever since we took it over, and that hasn't stopped, and in large part due to Heart of the Arts involvement in this, and Jenny Kostroff as their leader, as their executive director, and she is a dynamo when it comes to fundraising. And so we are ready to go forward with the next phase of this, and that would be the second floor. And but also with that comes the additional issue of parking. And this is something that we had discussed as a community way back when we first took over this facility. But as renovations keep coming along, we need to get this addressed. And in order to do that, we need authorization to go to the Board of Adjustments to try to clear that up. And so with tonight, I'm going to introduce Jenny here in a second, but what we'll be asking is acceptance of it's a conceptual, but a concept of the second floor design, renovation design, and you'll see it's pretty cool, and it's going to be a really valuable piece of this facility, and as well as authorization from the city council to request a variance for the parking. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Jenny. She has a nice presentation for you, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Hello, Jenny.
Hello. Okay, let's get down to this. It's fun times. So first, I want to give you a picture of what we've got going on upstairs. We say, what's up there? These are big questions. I think one of these is a laser pointer. We are looking at this second floor, and this is the entranceway that goes in to the west side of the building. So let's look and see what's up in this space. What we're planning to put into the second floor, and that we would like you to be on board with, we hope, is a historic classroom, a place to take children back in time to 1913 school for a living history experience. We're specifically going to focus on 4th graders having this experience because they learn about Idaho history, and beyond that we'll be able to expand the program out to other grades. This is a great partnership between us and the Latah County Historical Society, and also a chance for people to then rent a historic classroom for special events if they want to teach a class in there with modern computers at old desks. Those will be in the space. It will serve as a reminder of what this school used to look like back in 1913 when it was first opened. Across the way from that, we'll have a West Flex classroom. We're calling it a West Flex classroom right now. We've nicknamed it amongst our employees the Zoom room because we're talking about the potential of having a conference space that could address modern technology needs with the city and with the community. So we know that right now there isn't such a thing, and it would be really great to be able to do conferences and Zoom meetings with that facility already wired up with fiber. We have fiber optic at the building already, but it belongs to the city, so we don't use it. So it's something that we could do in partnership. This will be plumbed with a kitchenette so that we could have a coffee station there with water. It's on the other side of the water wall from the women's restroom. Then the auditorium space, this is the second floor auditorium. It's a 100-person performance or lecture space with a small stage. So you can see at the end of this, the chamber music performers are up on this small stage space. This could be paired with other rooms for special events to be able to have a place for your performer to go and a place for a reception at intermission or before or after the performance. And that would be the reception gallery across the way. We've nicknamed it the parlor because we're trying on different names for it because we've got to come up with a unique name for these spaces so that they are identifiable by people when they rent them. This space will have wonderful pocket doors that will have glass in them so you can see into the room. They'll slide open so you can have a bigger opening into the hallway for a reception, but be able to close those doors so you could have a private meeting or a luncheon with lots of beautiful natural light on the southern exposure of the building. Then a community living room space. This would be great for small retreats or book club meetings. It will have a dining table, couches, side tables, and a kitchenette with a full refrigerator. And it would be a great green room space for if you had a performance in the auditorium. So a place for your performers to wait before and after and during intermission. Then we have the East Flex Classroom. This is actually a photo of the senior center in use today with some card playing. There is card playing or mahjong playing every single day in the senior center. That is also where my office is. So sometimes the bridge people get a little upset. There's a little bit of conversation going on at the same time when I'm trying to book the building or answer people's questions about the space. So one of the fun things that we can do is create a really great community card playing game room that could be used by Parks and Rec to do classes, but also that we could have the senior uses during the daytime go upstairs for those games, and that way the senior center becomes more welcoming and it becomes a space where people can get their questions answered and use computers and do work puzzles, etc. So the East Flex Classroom would have the potential to do this. We've nicknamed it the Green Dragon Clubhouse, because that just sounds dramatic. But the Green Dragon Clubhouse sort of refers to mahjong with the Green Dragon and the club for the cards. The clubhouse is a place you hang out when you're in your little club and it's fun. So that's what the nickname we've been playing with. It would have a kitchenette also, and we would have that chance to move the games upstairs, which would be really great. Talking about amenities on this floor, we will have obviously a wonderful drinking fountain, but also a bottle filler for all those people that tote their bottles around town. We will be able to fill them with good filtered water. Then family restrooms on each end of the floor, so that would allow for people at each end of the floor to find a bathroom that they could use. That would include changing stations for kids in both of those family restrooms. Then the larger men's restroom and a larger women's restroom located independently at each side of the building, so where we would have space. The hallway would be able to offer some fine gallery space that we could expand our gallery from the main floor that we're currently operating to even upstairs, just like you do here at City Hall. Good times. Make people go all the way up the stairs. Then access, we have currently, the elevator does already go up to the third floor, so we would have access to the second floor right away with the elevator. We would have 2 new exterior side entrances to the building. This is going to add fun with wayfinding that we will be addressing at a later time, but this will mean that people will have entrances off the parking lot into the side second floor by going up those stairs, the ones we saw at the beginning, and then the interior stairwells will also come up to this second floor. So both ends of the building will have stairwells that go up, which is exciting. And we're looking forward to that as well. All the things that kids love to do on stairs, that's doubled in this building. Good times, just like they got in trouble running up and down the stairs. So here, let's look at the big picture. We were entering into this door. We have our flex classroom space that we're calling the Zoom room. There's the kitchenette. right on the side of the women's restroom so that it's got water in that wall. Then we've got the historic classroom space, then working our way down a family restroom at this end with drinking fountains, the stairwell coming up from downstairs. This is the side of the building by the Fisk Room and the Arts Workshop. Then you come along the hallway. Here are our pocket doors that open in for the reception gallery up front. And the nice part behind this, we've put in a janitor's closet and storage for the reception gallery area. So that's just one of the windows at the end here that will be in that storage space. Then across the way, we have our auditorium that can seat 100. Then the other end, this is the elevator here with the men's room at the back and the family restroom up at the front, which would allow people using the community living room to just have a restroom no matter who they are. And the flex classroom that we're calling the Green Dragon Clubhouse for play there. And again, parking lot access to this side as well on the east end of the building, and the east stairwell will also open up. So that is the big picture of our concept, and we hope you like it. We have fundraised $1 million at this point, and we're working on fundraising more so that we're ready to go, but we need your approval in order to go ahead and get all these plans drawn up down to specifics. And then we will discuss the part 2, but I figure I should answer questions about this first, separate.
I think that's a good idea, Jenny, because there's actually 2 actions that this will
Yes.
involve tonight. This was heard in front of the Public Works and Finance Committee.
Right,
on the
this
28th.
is the third time I've seen this proposal, and it gets more exciting every time with
Hey, I told
new
you I was gonna bring
pictures
it up.
and better rugs and
That's right.
everything. So I think you've done a great job of presenting this, Jenny, and I don't see any reason, maybe other people have questions, but it's certainly quite clear to me what you plan to do there, and I think it's in keeping with what the 12 Center is all about. So if anybody else has any questions, go ahead.
I just had a question for usage in one of the flex rooms. What if I had a restaurant and wanted to have like a satellite space in the 1912? Satellite restaurant? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the way we do tenant use at the building, we have a use committee, and the use committee would consider your request for space. And one of the early things that the use committee did was determine that the goal of this building should be to serve the larger population and not focus in on one specific tenant. So even our commercial kitchen space is a very shared space. There's the senior meal down in that kitchen, and we have a farmer's market vendor who makes sushi preparations in there on the Fridays and Saturdays, and we have a variety of different groups being able to cook for their events. So having a restaurant wanting a satellite location is probably not in the cards for the building, and I'm not trying to turn you away because we're a very inclusive space, but say you wanted to just get up and going in terms of doing a catering business, the commercial kitchen space down in the kitchen is more geared towards that kind of thing. We also, with the great room in the kitchen, are able to do a pop-up restaurant for you if you are getting to know the community. So we're going to serve your restaurant needs in different ways, but we really can't do a set determined space. On top of that, these spaces, in terms of the ventilation that would be required for specific cooking, they would be a little harder to do. Not impossible, but it really wouldn't be a good fit for this floor.
So one more follow-up, because it's multi-use building. What about like a pop-up daycare?
Pop-up daycare, yeah.
I know that's
Again,
regulating code, but I was
yeah.
just curious how.
Outside spaces are very limited. At the beginning of running the building, we had a lot of conversations with Palouse Prairie Charter School because they wanted to pretty much take over the whole top floor and turn it into a school. And I said, okay, so what happens at recess? Like, where are they going? Because those were elementary school kids who would be looking for and needing a recess space. We're not really geared for those kinds of things. Again, we're a better space for example, I just booked a pop-up kinder music class that's going to do a 4-class session, and they're going to offer that and do a class where the parents would be attending with the kids, and it would be a community-oriented event, 4 sessions, they're done, that's what they're doing. So again, the more we can serve the community at large to do things like start new ideas or get things going or meet the needs that are one-off needs for the community, we're a better fit for that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Gina?
Congratulations on $1 million raised. That's awesome.
I'm just keep plugging. I think the prices are going up to match my fundraising, but I hope that that's not completely the case. We're doing a tiny art show as a fundraiser this summer, so come give to the second floor and get a piece of tiny art, because we'll be doing sealed bids for that starting the 20th of June. So that'll be a lot of fun. But we're constantly fundraising towards this. With Idaho Gives, we raised $17,500 for the project. And I don't, this isn't quite my handshake, but I'm getting there because I really want to do the second floor. And I'm pretty sure the community's behind me too, that really, really want to see what's up there and what it can do for our community.
Well, I think dynamo is well applied. And we've got great vocabulary tonight. We had an extravaganza on the last item, and now we have a dynamo on this one.
Woo!
My question for you is, what is the scale of this project? What is, $1 million is what you have already. Is it a $10 million project? Is it a $4 million? I need to understand.
We're sort of guessing, and this is where I might refer to my team back in the corner. They're all hiding back in that corner. We've got board members and friends. No, they're all board members of Heart of the Arts that are back there. We're kind of guessing that it's a $1.5 million project, but our master plan is to build up our bid documents with a base project, which would get all of, this floor has no heating, no cooling, no electrical, no plumbing, no lighting, and we need sprinkling systems up there. So we've got all of this good infrastructure that needs to go into that floor. And my master plan is that we start with infrastructure, and then we have alternates that add the finer detail work to each of the rooms. And so if we don't manage to get the whole floor operational at the same time, we have a thermometer on a door that's locked, and if you want to finish and see this room, you help donate to make it happen. So I think that's the big picture, is that our goal is that we might dial back some of the detail work that we can then put in later. A good example would be like in the reception space, we plan to put a kitchenette at the back of the reception space, but say this actually has no subfloor. The rest of this floor has wood floor in it. That's usable wood floor. We're hoping to be able to use what's existing there. And whether or not we let it still squeak, that's a good question. But the reception gallery is right over the great room, and during the construction of the great room, that was brought back to a subfloor. So it's going to require flooring. It's going to require some other details, and that pocket door is breaking out a wall so that we can have that access. So because of that, maybe we don't put in the kitchenette yet. Like maybe that's stubbed and waiting, and it's going to come in at a later time. It's not necessary for the room, but it's something that will add a lot of value to that space. So, and some of the finer details that can come, like window trims and things like that, the details, they cost money, and but they can be done maybe as a finishing detail that could be done outside of the contract. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So along the same lines, so it sounds, I guess with phasing, are you thinking that if things progress to the point where this is moving ahead, that everything at some basic level occurs at the same time, or would it be a room by room process?
Well, I mean, shoot, if we go out to bid and the bids come back and they're affordable for us, then we will say yes to all of them. I mean, like, that's the plan, is to get that whole floor finished. We're not looking to skimp on that. But what we want to do is we still have to get infrastructure in there no matter what. So if we have $1 million, that's not going to get less expensive to do the infrastructure later. So if we have a base bid that allows us to get that work done and we continue the fundraising, it depends on the contractor whether they'll let us add alternates as we go through the project for the same price point that they were bid. But in the past, we've been really, really lucky and very grateful for the opportunities to work with, like Pioneer Waterproofing, who let us carry over a contract over the winter to continue it the next year, and that allowed us to continue the fundraising, and then we could buy more windows and get more exterior renovated. So we've been we've had some really great working relationships as we've gone along, and it's allowed us to do what we can do, because this is all fundraised from our community. Like, we very rarely get grants that come into this project, so most of this fundraising has been just our community gifts, and that's amazing. That's $19.12 by a lot of people. So I love that part, because it means it's all our building.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'd say as far as the design goes, which is what we're talking about now, I love that it just has a lot of flexibility built into it. I mean, there isn't a lot of permanent structures that I see on here, and even the things like the kitchens have a lot of versatility, even if the use in that space is different in 20 years from now or 30 years from now than what you're envisioning now, so.
And I think that's
great.
important, because our town has a lot of things that change. The needs change as we go along. It's like, oh, all of a sudden we have this new need, and it never existed before. And that's really an important thing. I find now constantly groups are using projectors for events, and when I started, people had events with no PowerPoint presentations, so it's like things change. And now the teleconferencing has become a big thing with video, so.
I do have a question. Are you having to do all build-ins for storage in all the rooms?
At this point, we don't have any storage. I mean, like, that's what this little piece is for storage in the building. We would have this for some table storage in here, or tablecloth storage, things like that. I mean, right now, the building doesn't have a lot of storage, except in these pockets down off of the great room, which has been really nice for the senior meal to have storage there. But as you get upstairs, there's windows everywhere. So, and to steal square footage for storage always feels like, well, do we have to? But we do really need to think about it, because that's an important part of making sure the spaces don't look cluttered and ugly. They're more presentable and usable without having to have a big, I mean, I've got a pile of tablecloths outside my office door right now. It's embarrassing, but it means we have a lot of events in the building, so I think of it that way, even though it is laundry bags. And so I'd like to find a place to get my laundry stored that's not visible, so that it's a little less embarrassing. But again, lots of events make lots of tablecloths, so, yeah.
Well, oh, did you have a question?
I did, and maybe this is separate. Do we want to okay the design first and then
Yeah,
talk
we
about
got,
parking?
there's two actions we
Okay,
got to do
I have a
here.
question when we're done with that then.
Well, I would move to accept the proposed 1912 Center second floor renovation design concept.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Brandy and a second by Gina to accept the proposed 1912 second floor renovation design concept. We'll start with Ann.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
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 Okay, now we have the second action we need to take. But Gina, you had a question concerning that.
Well, and maybe you're going to tell us all about this anyway. So why don't you just give us the,
Okay,
Give
I
us
have
the
no
skinny.
visual aids for this one, because there's only so much time to make PowerPoints in my life. So the conversation has come up that obviously we are currently at almost capacity for the number of parking spaces for our current occupancy, for the 10,000 square feet on the ground and first floors. So to add the second floor and later the third floor, we have maxed out parking at the 1912 Center. The entire parking lot has been built on that property, and there isn't additional space to be found there on site. But then we also have a partnership with the city for the lot that's across the way there. And that's the Jefferson Street lot that's supposed to be available after hours, so the after work hours and the weekends for the 1912 Center use. So those are the parking spaces that are in the count for what we're currently occupying. Well, there are a few more than that. We said, like, there were 64 spaces currently available, and there are 55 that the city has determined that we should have for the current occupancy at the building. So what we are asking council for is the ability to apply with the Board of Adjustments for a variance, to be able to work with what we currently have available to us in terms of parking, and make a plan that our occupancies of these upper floors would behave in such a way that we would never we would never go beyond the 64 parking spaces that we have going for the building. A good example of this would be if we have an event in the great room that we don't book an event in the auditorium, or that if it's a wedding that's using the great room for a reception, they have their wedding in the auditorium. It's the same number of people, just using 2 spaces. That we partner spaces together, like if you're having an event, the auditorium, the reception gallery, or the parlor, like we're calling it, and the community living room are all tied together for that event. That spaces are designed to be used yin and yang and in tandem, so that we look at the needs for parking any day, like we look at any given day and we say, what is happening this day? There shouldn't be more parking required than the number of spaces that are occupied by people. So it's sort of a plan to use the building wisely, to monitor how the relationships of the spaces, and then if it looks like something, a good example would be a conference. So say a conference would like to use the second floor and the first floor on a Wednesday when we don't have a senior meal. And they'd like to use both of those spaces for a conference. And it would be a number of people with different breakout rooms and lots of activity. When we know we would be in a situation where we would be partnering like that, that we would then work with the hotels and or busing to make sure that we have people having parking off-site that maximizes what's needed for that event. So that's sort of our general proposal, and it's obviously we'll get down to the minutia of this with our variance application, but the big picture is that we would like to do this through the management of the spaces, so that the community has these spaces available to them, because if we don't renovate this and don't allow for parking, then we're done. We shouldn't even be fundraising for the upper floors. We should mothball them. And that breaks my heart. I love touring up there while it's unrenovated, but I think this is a loss for our community, because some of these spaces address different needs. So it doesn't mean that the first floor and the ground floor are going to be the ones that are in use. Those could be quiet, and the upper floors could be the ones that are used. And I like the idea, too, that we would develop calendars that would block out spaces. So if you're planning a wedding and you want the top floor ultimately, that then maybe you get 3 people to come set up an event, but that's all you get on that day. The next day is your event. All the people are up there and there's nothing happening down below. Or again, it's a partnership of spaces. So that's our thought. And I can get more specific if there's the right question to guide me there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me that that's kind of your next task, is to go through all those details, make your proposal to Board of Adjustment, and that's the next step in the process, and then they give their recommendation. So I would be in favor of moving this on to the Board of Adjustment and then seeing what they conclude and what they recommend.
You want to put in a motion for it?
Sure. I would make the motion, where are we here? To authorize the Heart of the Arts Incorporated to apply for a parking space variance through the Board of Adjustment.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Brandy and a second by Catherine to authorize the Heart of the Arts to apply for a parking space variance through the Board of Adjustment. Further discussion?
I did have a follow-up question. And maybe it's just that I'm having a hard time picturing this. How will you tell a wedding party they can only have 64 cars?
You don't tell a wedding party they can only have 64 cars. But at our lovely building department, they tell me that the great room requires a certain number of parking spaces. So if we're using the great room, we're presuming that amount of parking spaces. But the truth is, all the time, Gina, I constantly think about this. Are you having an event in the summer? Then you're going to have street parking available to you, when during the regular school year, you wouldn't have street parking available to you. So when I'm booking people during the daytime, I look at everything that's going on in the building, and then I look at what's happening in our neighborhood. A good example is during the Sunday mornings at the building, our parking lot is filled with Unitarian Church and Methodist Church attendees. And it's because we've sort of have this unspoken agreement that they will tolerate neighborhood parking at the same time that we tolerate them parking on Sunday mornings when we have nothing going on. Big picture is that in a neighborhood, you have to share and you have to work well with your neighbors, and we spend a lot of time doing exactly that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions before we know what the, okay, I'll start to roll with Ann.
Aye.
All right.
All right.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, you have those two things. Thank you, Jenny, and I don't know of anybody that can get as much information in as you possibly can. It's amazing to listen to you speak. Anyway, good job, so. And we'll go, with that, we'll go on to item number 10, and this is the Dwight Curtis hour, of course, because we got the adoption of the Parks and Rec Master Plan update. Dwight, you have the podium, sir.
All right, thank you. Let me get a sit up here. Voila.
Person to do that job the last 12 years.
All right. Well, thank you, and I'm sorry I can't talk as fast as Jenny, but I will do my best to get through this before midnight. And so
I'll chop you off for that.
please, yeah, thank you. So this is a request for adoption of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan Update 2019. This would replace our 2013 version. And again, it is an update. So not only to update, but this establishes, an adopted system so that we can approach our development and our planning in a manner that gets us where we need to go. And so I do have a presentation here. The survey questions and all of that, the comments to that were in your packets. I don't plan to go through those tonight unless you have something specific that you would like, but I do have them on the presentation here if you would like me to go through them. But it would get us through to midnight. So, so in this plan, we have the normal stuff, the planning process that we went through, the survey results and the actionable items, a park inventory, our facility standards needs assessment, and our implementation plan. The maps are in there and updated, and also the survey results and comments. It's important, these are common sense, but I'll spell it out for you. Anyway, it's a means for our community to evaluate its Parks and Rec system and determine its current and future needs. It offers an opportunity for the different entities within the city to provide feedback and helps us prioritize our actions. And it also provides us a guide to systematically accomplish our prioritized actions. So a little bit about population projections. Moscow is very steady, seems to have always been, and we ran this out to 2030, I guess it was, and you can figure about, I think it's 10,000 per decade, and so the growth has been steady. It's about 14% a decade. Current population, well, in 2015, the census was 25,000. No growth explosions. This is nothing like what happens down in the Boise area. They have an explosion. And talking to the different Parks and Rec directors down there at our conferences and things, this is a pretty nice place to be a Parks and Rec director. The median age here is about 24 years. 27% is under 18. 20 to 44 is the largest group, and a lot of that is U of I. And the genders, if you see on the graph to the right, fairly equal on both genders. And of course, the whole point of this is that, the diversity of our programs, we need to know this so we can develop our programs based on those to meet all their different needs as best that we can. Okay, really small. The point here isn't for you to have to read this. It's just to show you a guide that's in, it's a quick reference guide that we developed for all of our parks. And so it'll tell you what park, what category it fits in, as well as the size of the parks. And a lot of our standards are based on these numbers. Plus, we're asked all the time how big a park is. So if a person's looking at this, you can tell, and that helps people when they're doing planning for outdoor recreation. Okay, the process, it's basically broken into 3 phases. The plan development, which is what we're doing right now. Then phase 2 is the implementation of the plan. And of course, that depends on you adopting this. And also, there's 3 parts to this, the facility standards overhaul, the needs assessment, and the implementation. We won't go over those tonight because they are not actually in here. The reason for that is the National Recreation and Park Association, which is the organization that we have adopted their standards. They've changed the way that they're doing this. And the way it's been is it was based on population. So just as an example, per capita, you would need so many tennis courts, things like that. Well, somebody came up with the bright idea that not all communities are the same. I mean, the populations are different, the desires are different, and because there's a standard developed nationally doesn't mean that every community meets that, and they shouldn't have to meet that. And a lot of grants and things like that are based on these standards. So a lot of communities weren't eligible to apply for grants and do various things like that because they couldn't meet the standards. A community that is mostly senior citizens isn't necessarily need a lot of t-ball courts and things like that, t-ball fields. So you need to fix your standards so that they meet your specific needs. And so we will do that first, and then once we know what our standards are, then we would then do a needs assessment based on that, and then be able to develop the implementation plan based on that. And then lastly, the next update would be 2025, and we would start in 2024, the development of that. So we met a lot of times, tonight being the 12th, and these were all advertised and all welcoming of public input. We didn't get a lot of public input, especially through the early meetings, but we discussed the progress as we were going along with the Parks and Rec Commission, and then we developed a survey, had the public workshop. The November or March 28th meeting was our 9th. There was also a public workshop to go over what the first public workshop accomplished. And so at the last meeting of the administrative committee last week, the recommendation was for council approval of this, and tonight being our final meeting for this, hopefully, and that would be to get you to adopt this. The survey results, this is, we use this to come up with most of our actionable items. There were 25 questions. It was pretty simple, but we thought it was well thought out and covered across the spectrum. It was online, and we offered hard copy. We used SurveyMonkey as our software. We had only 558 responses, but most everything went pretty much the way we predicted it to go. And we covered demographics, we publicized services, usages, accessibility, all of our parks and amenities, their facilities, programs, safety, environment, and conservation. We experienced a few technical difficulties. We tested the dickens out of this software before we sent that survey out, and sure enough, as soon as it went out, there were some issues. Most of the issues that we had were with the ADA accessibility type items. We had a pretty good idea where we stood with that, and we are already, the city is working on a master plan for accessibility anyway. So this, we don't figure that invalidated the survey. It just, it would have been nice to have had a little more result of that, though, on the survey.
Hey, Dwight, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you have 25 questions on a survey and it takes at least a minute, do you have a tabulation of how long people spent on the survey? Does that come in on your thing, like people spent mostly 40 minutes, or do you?
Well,
does
it
that
does,
show
but
up?
I don't know what it said. SurveyMonkey can tell you how much it took. We estimated, sorry, off the cuff, I can't tell you what we estimated. It wasn't very long. We did have questions. One question could have several questions within it, So it could, if you were thinking, I'm guessing off the top here, but about 15 minutes. But we can get you that if you want it. We still have it.
Curious, because that's a lot of questions.
It is, but we needed those questions.
I know, I'm not saying that, that's just a lot of questions to tabulate.
Well, we cut it back from 200, so that was. I'm kidding, sorry. So with this, we developed our actionable items to reflect citizen input. We have a few that aren't necessarily out of the survey. Also, we believe that these are doable and they're reasonable. And we did have one question that was on the city's community survey, and that was on nicotine-free parks. I had attended a conference in Helena, Montana, in between the time that we put out our survey and when the city put out its community survey, and I wanted to see where the community was on that, and it scored highly on that, and so we thought it was worthwhile to add that as an actionable item to explore. So with this, we had a lot of verbal responses, and in particular, we worked with the Sustainable Environment Commission. I don't have the letter, but we do have a letter from the Sustainable Environment Commission supporting the actionable items that are applicable to them. We had Mike Kammeyer, Nancy Cheney, and Pete Robichaud that sent in questions and comments, and we addressed all of those. And then comes the big thing, and this is our plan. We have a lot of work coming our way. Some of these are carryovers from the 2013 action plan or master plan. We thought were still valuable and ongoing enough that we wanted to leave them in there. So these are not in priority order. They're just down. So the first one is to continue our park property development, which we are going full steam ahead. As you're already aware, we've been opening up parks each year, and we're still doing that. We want to continue as long as we have funding, and basically projecting out that we'll get most of our undeveloped properties at least usable in the next few years. Also, to reduce pesticide usage. You don't have to read the paper very many times before you know there's an issue with this across the country, if not the world. We want to be good stewards. We do use chemicals. We have always gone through the Sustainable Environment Commission to get their blessings on the chemicals that we use and how we use them, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that come up over time that shows that maybe those aren't the best things. And so we want to reduce pesticide, so we'll develop that. And we're already working with them to do that now. Also, water conservation, it's a big topic in Moscow. So we want to develop a policy and process for that. And in your packets, you'll see I have a lot of detail on each of these, and we'll work to integrate these into our strategic plan. But, for water conservation, it can be anywhere from letting something go strategically browning or as far as, Y-scapes, zero-scapes, things like that. We'll be working with the folks down at our water department to get the best results we can out of that as well. Accessibility master plan, already covered that. The city is working on a city master plan. We're working on our portion of that through parks and facilities. They're really not bad as they stand now, but there's still a lot of work that can be done, and we're not going to stop until we've identified everything and have a plan for it. And also alternative energy sources. This is a big topic everywhere. It seems like every year that we get asked to, what our policy is on, solar power for the pools and things like that. So we have had this looked at before, but technology changes. And we also have other facilities that might be able to utilize other alternative energy sources as well. A lot of our light poles and things like that have solar powers. A lot of the bus shelters have it. My calculator has it. There's some pretty cool stuff out there. So we want to address this thoroughly and go as far as we can with this. It's not always that it's going to be cost effective, but sometimes it's just the right thing to do. So we'll bring you a comprehensive report on that with suggestions. And parkland dedication, our valuation structure is out of whack. It has been, it always has been. And it's a delicate thing, it's a legal thing, but we want to address that and try to bring in the fee in lieu of on an equal basis with the land itself, so that it's actually an option that's worth dealing with. The development of parks and facility standards, already talked about that. This was a carryover from the 2013 plan, but that was also before the NRPA, National Recreation and Park Association, changed theirs. So this is more applicable now than it even was. We want to look at the possibilities of covering or an indoor playground, and also what are the options and possibilities of a bubble for the aquatics facilities, so that you have some swimming year-round. This has been yes.
I have a question about that. So were those questions on the survey asking?
Yes.
And how did they get there? Like, were you just hearing people asking about them?
We get asked all the time. I mean, this is all the time. So we put the question on the survey.
One thing I've been asked many times, so I'm kind of surprised it hasn't reached you, is people ask about the little, splash pad things like they have in Sandpoint and in Boise. When can we get one of those? And
well, a lot of that's going to depend on you.
So that's not something that you've specifically asked about the level of interest in that or anything?
We did not put that on. Well, it is. There's actually, I think splash pad was one of the sub-questions. But we do get asked about that all the time as well. We had, I think had's the right word, we had some planning money to do an assessment for infrastructure at the pool. Because we thought maybe if the infrastructure was there and also a secured environment, that might be the place to start with that. Splash pads have their own issues, and so we thought having something that we could have control of right off would be a good start, and then take off from there. If you remember Eric Newell, our previous rec supervisor, where he's at now, they're putting in splash pads, and they're quite a hit. And we have some place to start with when we're talking. But
sometimes it depends on the area of the United States you're in too. I mean, you can be somewhere for 8 or 9 months a year. You can use one.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just more wondering if it's something that you heard some
We hear it
questions
all the
about, or,
time.
and it sounds like it was a sub-question in your survey.
We hear
so
it
thank
all
you.
the time.
Mhm.
Yes. And also, the park concept plans that we have, that you guys have approved, I think 2 of the last 4, maybe 3, have splash pads in the plans. So I just had an epiphany one day. I don't know, I was just looking out the door and I saw the fence on the east side of the pool, and that was all put up before the Herc was put up. And so there's room now where we could actually move that fence and expand that yard area for the pool, and that would be a natural place to put in a splash pad to start with. And but we need somebody with a little more experience than I've got to do the assessment to see if that could actually be done with the infrastructure that we have. There's a lot of pipes and stuff underneath that concrete, so it might not work. But there might be other places there that would work. So that is on the horizon. We're certainly it's there. We just got to get to that. In the parks, that would be amenities, and as the plan is, we use the Hamilton money to get the park started, and then we'll fill in with the amenities as we can afford them. Right now, the priorities are going to likely be anyway, restrooms. Everybody's crying for the restrooms now, so, and they're expensive as well. So, but yes, we are going to get there. Let's see. So, and this isn't necessarily to say we're going to do this. This is to explore it and see. I mean, we subsidize the pool every year. Now just add on another 6-7 months of that. So, this could be, it could be very expensive, but it might be worthwhile. So we want to look at it. The comprehensive network of pathways, this is something the city has been working on for decades. I heard just the other day that a graduate student that approached us last fall, I think it was, and she wanted to work on her master's. Her project was to develop a plan for a pathway going north, because there used to be a rail line went north. So she wanted to look at that, and I heard that she has graduated and has that. She didn't come back to us. That was supposed to be part of the deal, was she was going to come back and present to the city, and that just didn't happen. So one of our folks is getting with her professor to see if we can't get that information and take a look at it. So, but anyway, pathways, not just that, all over the place where you can make connections. And that's why we have a Pathways Commission. Cultural infrastructure, Kathleen Burns, our previous arts director, was really, really big on this, having art in the parks and any place that she could put some. And Cherry,
Megan.
Megan Cherry, she's really into this as well. She's still working on the stuff that she already had in the mix, but we don't want that to go away, so we'll be working with her and the Arts Commission to keep that going. We have the Blackbird Station, for example, is complete as far as Parks and Rec is concerned, but there's an art piece that's supposed to go in there. And so just things like that, that's where these they're really important, and we don't want it to go away. The equal distribution of park spaces, this is where you take advantage of opportunities. I would say Otness Park, just across the road here, is a good example of that. You have a place that can possibly be developed, and have a little bit of vision with that. Throw this one at Bill Belknap. I think that was his idea to start with, but it seemed insurmountable at the very first, but I mean, that's a really nice park. And so we want to look at infill, that kind of thing, and see what kind of spaces between the different parks. If you look in your maps, we have the kind of the highlighted circles on the walkability and the overlaps of the different park uses. So it helps show where we're lacking.
So to follow up on that, have you ever had anybody count how many people use a park in a day? Do you have that kind of data? No.
Have not.
Okay.
Have not. I know we attempted that at one time, not long after I got here, but it was so confusing, they gave up. So, I mean, use East City Park, for example. I mean, not only do you have 4 entryways that are regular, but you can walk into that park anywhere you want. And I think they had a group that came in, and people left and came and left. They just threw their clipboards down and said, that's it. And so, yeah. Yeah. So, anyway, but, we'd be happy to hire you to come down and do a count for us.
I am used to that kind of stuff, though,
Well,
professionally.
True. Our recreational programming, we like what we're doing. We think we're doing a good job. We try to do the best that we can to provide as much recreational programming for as wide a variety of people that we can. We do know that there's some things that are lacking that we're trying to get a grip on. And let's say, speaking of people with physical challenges and things like that, if somebody dropped in and wanted to play adult basketball, but they were in a wheelchair, could we accommodate that, just as an example? So we're trying to grasp that. We have a graduate student over at the university that we're working with, but she is pretty busy, so I don't know how far we're going to get with her, but it was really, we were talking about the transportation group earlier and a presentation and how eye-opening it was to listen to these folks, and you just think, oh my God, how did we miss all of this, a whole population that's there. So we want to first find out if we're actually really missing it, because there are other groups that are offering things. So, but we just don't want that to be left out there and not at least known what's needed. The university used to have an option in their rec program, their degree program, that was for all of that, and they've dropped that. So we don't have that anymore as a local resource anyway. So, but that's one of the things, we just don't want that to slip. An efficient use of our resources. We almost dropped this one, but at the same time, it still makes a statement that we want to continue, and that is to maintain first-class system across the board. And then lastly, we talked about this, and this was to explore the designation of the city's parks and properties as nicotine-free. There was a time when I would have bet money that you could never get something like this passed anywhere, but they're actually all over the country now. And I was at a conference in Helena, and they actually passed this, and this is nicotine-free. We're talking vaping, the whole works, chew, the works, and they say it's been very successful. So it's not as I understand it anyway, something where you have the police going down and arresting somebody because they're smoking. It's more of a volunteer, that you put up the signage and then it just sort of cuts it down. I don't know that it's going to ever be perfect. So, but these are the 14 actionable items. A lot of work here, but we think it is doable. We think these are reasonable. This doesn't mean we're not taking advantage of other information that was in the survey. A lot of things in there were program related, and it doesn't need to be in the action, as an actionable item. And this, for us to know that, let's just say, 100% of the people that responded wanted pickleball. So we would explore that and see what we could do. And so things of that nature. And with that, my conclusion is that this was citizen-driven. It is an update. We didn't start from scratch. We do have the 14 actionable items that were identified and designated. The overall facility standards, as I mentioned, we need to redo those, followed by the needs assessment and the implementation. And of course, these standards, all that stuff would come before the city council. Once adopted, this plan update, the final issue will have an acknowledgements page added to it. And then, like I mentioned before, the next update would be in 2025. And with that, I am completely open to going through the entire survey if you would like me to.
Additional questions
More
for
questions?
Dwight?
Yeah, quick question. I like that you included an update date because we don't always see that with plans. What prompted the 2025 decision?
Well, it varies in different places on how often they do updates. To me, things change enough that if you go every 5 years, then it's small corrections and it's something a community can handle. If you go 10 years, I mean, that's a long time, and you could have enough changes in that it's a major issue just to make the changes, overall changes in one big whack like that. So through my whole career, any chance that I've had input on it, I've always gone 5 years. We were a little off with the 2013 because, well, we had a contractor, a contract with a company to help us with it, and it just fell flat on its face, and we ended up having to finish it in-house, and it just put us behind. But there was still a lot of good info in there, and it was just hard to tell what it was you were actually supposed to be doing. So this one, I tried to make it a few less words, more direct approach to what it is we want to accomplish.
Great. And then I just had a comment, which is that P&Z had requested information about parkland dedication, and Mia and Gary had provided that, and I'd be happy to forward it to you, the Parks and Rec folks and the P&Z folks again, because that might be a conversation you all have together.
You bet. And as I had mentioned to them at that time, invite me and I'll come talk to them.
Yeah.
So. And they would be involved, I would believe, anyway, as we go through this change, trying to figure this thing out and make it equitable.
Has that been talked about on P&Z in 2019, Brandy?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't think so. We've been talking about cluster subdivisions and different park requirements for that, but that's something very different situation.
Tune in on this?
Yeah, there are some changes to the parkland dedication section of the code that are in the subdivision code draft that P&Z has been reviewing. That includes adjusting some of the percentages based on the densities of the various zoning districts. So there were some that, so if you went to the R1 zoning district that has a 9,600 square foot lot size down to the farm ranch has 3 acres, the same percentage of dedication was required between those two zoning districts. And those percentages are intended to relate to the number of individuals that would need to be served with park facilities in that zoning district. So some of those percentages are going to go down in the more rural large lot areas. And then there are also some proposed increases in the higher density multifamily residential zones. The question that Dwight was talking about was how you value if you're going to take a fee in lieu of. There is a process already in the code that goes through an appraisal process to determine the value of that land. I think that's the conversation that Dwight wants to review that process to make sure that it's coming up with a fair value. But the percentages themselves are in the subdivision code. Those will be having some slight changes to calibrate them to the densities of the different zoning districts.
But
And
the fees have not been discussed.
Yeah, the fees are not actually set in the code. It just sets up to where it's negotiated, or there's appraisals that are completed to determine the fair value. For administration purposes, there's been a value that's been established by the Parks and Rec Department, but that's not in the code, that's by policy. And I think that's been the question of that value, because the way the code reads it is the fair value of the raw land, kind of exclusive of the public improvements that may be coming along with it. And so that's a different value than a finished lot. And so that has really been the question of how to come up with a fair value, because every property is different and unique, and you don't want to go through doing multiple appraisals every time you're trying to determine what that value is. So it's that aspect of if you're determining value of a fee in lieu of that I think the Parks and Rec Commission wants to take a look at. But the percentages are all set, the dedication requirements are all there. It's just a determination of how do you come to that value. And the Parks and Rec Department has had a value of $13,500 an acre. I think it's been utilized for quite some time. And that's been applied rather than going through the appraisal process that's also offered in the code. I mean, you can negotiate with the developer or you can go through that appraisal process.
Okay, other questions for Dwight?
Your Honor, I move that we adopt the City of Moscow's Parks and Recreation Master Plan Update 2019.
Second.
Okay, we we have a motion by Gina and a second by Art to adopt the City of Moscow's Park and Recreation Master Plan Update of 2019. I'll start the roll with Catherine.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you, Dwight, very much.
Thank you
for
so
a wonderful presentation. Item number 11, Bond Reimbursement Resolution by Gary Reedner. Oh,
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a fairly straightforward process. As the council knows, we had a successful general obligation capital bond election on the 21st of May. There is a process that begins once that election was successful. Congratulations on the community for passing a 66 2/3% requirement bond with a passage of over 69%. So a pretty good statement by the community that they wanted to move forward with this bond. Once that starts, then Latah County needs to canvass the results of the elections, the election which they did last Wednesday. It was canvassed. From that point, once that's published, then there is a 40-day protest period that begins, and that's typical in Idaho law. It's typical when you do judicial confirmations. There's a period of time where someone, if there is a legal challenge, they can raise that within that period of time. Once that period of time passes, no protest and then no lawsuit is filed, then it is presumed and it's a valid election. At that point, we can move forward with passing a bond ordinance, preparing the paperwork, and then ultimately selling the bonds. The process we're going through, the bond ordinance would be considered by City Council on August 5th. April's a little late. August 5th, same date that we have the public hearing for the FY 2020 budget. Council, if they pass that bond ordinance, then we would go out to sale. We've determined that the most efficient and cheapest way, returning the most dollars to the city, would be to have a sale that is conducted by our financial advisor. It will be probably, I don't know that it'll be privately placed, but there was a question, just as an aside, as to whether there would be the ability for our citizens to purchase those bonds. That likely will not happen. It's a large enough bond issue that we will get significant economies of scale by putting it out, allowing banks to bid on it. At any rate, once the council passes that bond ordinance, we will prepare the actual documents for sale. Then the bond sale will take place somewhere in mid to late August. The funds would become available by our nearest reckoning would be the first week of September of 2019. So that's when the city would actually have those funds in the city coffers. Obviously, we've got some things that need to happen before then. You may have noticed about a week and a half ago in the Saturday edition of the Daily News, there was an advertisement requesting qualifications for architects who wish to design the building. So that went out, it was published, it'll be a couple of weeks yet, and then those those requests for qualification will be reviewed, and we will recommend a project architect to bring to the city council. Fairly tight timeline. The idea is to get the architect chosen, negotiate a contract, get the architect working on the project, design the project, and there's some, as we talked about during the bond election, there are issues such as the energy efficiency of the building, the actual design of the building, utilizing the stakeholders that will be in the building, so on and so forth. It'll take some time to gather all that information and then design the building itself. We want to bid it when it is a favorable bid climate, which means very late 2019 or very early 2020. Hope to break ground in spring of 2020, and with the building being occupied sometime in early 2021. fairly tight time frame to get the design ready to go and get the bids out there, or requests for bids. Additionally, as the council authorized in December, we have a piece of property, $807,000 was the purchase price of the property. Council purchased an option on the property. The option had to be exercised prior to the end of June 2019. Staff moved forward with setting a closing. The check has been cut, delivered to Latah County Title to get that closed so that we actually have a piece of property in the city's name in order to place this police station on. We've got some bills that are going to come due prior to getting the actual bond proceeds in September. That's entirely allowable under the law. However, it requires a bond resolution, bond reimbursement, reimbursement resolution so that the city, as it expends money in advance of the funding of the bond, receiving the funds from the bond, that the bond can be utilized to reimburse the city for that. So the check that was cut to Latah County Title in trust for the sellers, that came out of accumulated funds, and then when the bond funds come available in September, they will be reimbursed into those funds. Likewise, as we begin to incur expenses for advertising the RFQ, selecting an architect, actually paying the first several billings for that architect, we will need funding for that as well. This bond resolution, reimbursement resolution, allows all of those expenses reasonably related to the bond to go ahead and be reimbursed when the bond funding is received. So, Bond Council drafted this resolution, reviewed by our legal team, and it's ready for council to pass so that we can get those expenses reimbursed when the funding comes through.
Questions for Gary?
Just one easy one. Does all of this require reopening the budget sometime in September?
It's already in there.
Yeah, we've actually got the money in there. I believe we put $10 million in for that. But we will not, I don't believe we will need to open the budget for this particular. But if we need to, we will be opening it in August, and if we can predict what it will be, if there is a necessity to do that, we can do that at that same time.
Cool.
This was heard by Public Works Finance at the last meeting, and I think we recommended approval, and so I would so move that we approve it, this reimbursement resolution at this time.
Seconded.
Okay, we've got a motion by Jim and a second by Gina to approve the reimbursement resolution. I'll start with Ann, or Catherine. I'm getting tired. Catherine, I'm sorry.
Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank you.
There you go. Well, that is the end of our regular agenda, so we will start into reports. I'll start with you, Brandy.
I have nothing to report since the last council meeting.
Nice and easy. We'll
Yeah.
move on to Gina then.
Parks and Rec Commission, you saw what we did at the last meeting. The tree commission for tomorrow evening is canceled. I think we're all out playing in the trees at this point is what's going on with that group. Called into the CETA board meeting. They had a speaker who spoke to us about the 2020 census. That's breathing down our necks right now. And if you're so moved, you can go get a part-time job with them. And actually full-time jobs too, but there are a larger number of part-time jobs available for the census, should you be interested.
Actually, can I just rewind for a moment to say that I did have planning and zoning, but I missed it because I was ill, and Councilmember Bonzo filled in for me, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Catherine.
The Chamber of Commerce had their soiree on Saturday night, and that was well attended and a lovely event. And then I did go to planning and zoning for Brandy, who still sounds like you're recovering. Yeah. And it was a very serious meeting, and they had a public hearing, and I love that Victoria asks really interesting questions. But there was a preliminary plat discussion, and they approved a PUD that we will end up seeing. And they were talking about buffer zones and type A buffer zones and different types of trees, which I have a feeling you'll probably see this at the tree commission, all that kind of stuff, but what to do with these coming in and the PUD that was there. And then there's still lots of conversation about affordable housing, and I think everybody's doing that, and so P&Z was doing that too. And so I think that that'll be coming up. And then they had a final review for an ordinance. They went through the whole planning and zoning document with all the check marks and the things that we had, and the educational services area that we had, per the survey, pushed them to discuss. They discussed it, but went much further with it, so we'll see that coming to us too. And then there was another subdivision code review that they're working on, so they have a very full docket of things that they're coming through, and I think that with all the new information coming out, things are changing, and so they're really constantly updating. So I enjoyed it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Jim. Historic Preservation Commission met on May 30th, and the main thing on their plate right now is the historic interpretive sign at the library that will be the same as the one on City Hall here and at the 1912 building, and they're deciding on which pictures and the text and whatnot, but it's coming along and should be up there before the end of the year, I would think. And also they're working on the Orchid Awards for preservation of historic buildings in the historic district. And so if anybody knows of anybody that's refurbishing a historic building and would like to be on that list for consideration for an Orchid Award, please contact someone at the Historic Preservation Commission, and they'll get them on the list.
I think it's Wendy McClure.
Yeah, it's Wendy.
Yeah. And are they doing onions too? Did I see that, or was that?
Yeah, that's another award.
But we don't nominate people for onions.
Not yet.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Okay, Mark?
Got nothing for you.
Okay, yeah.
The Human Rights Commission, one of the commission members had received a couple postcards with pretty racist caricatures on them. So they talked about those at length. They were published in the Moscow Pullman Daily. There were 2, I believe. And so they had a pretty lengthy discussion about that, but the larger discussion they had was about tracking those incidents, because no one does currently. And so they essentially talked about what their role would be in that, and what essentially they want to talk to city staff about in terms of how to do it, because we track a lot of things, but that's not one of them. So I think we'll be seeing something from them that talks about what that might look like. That is my update.
Okay. I had a couple of things. May 27th, we had a MIAC meeting in here with a bunch of our MIAC kids, and that kind of ties in with the June 1st chamber auction, because 4 of those kids helped with the new way of doing silent bids and bidding for the auction they had, so that was kind of an interesting thing and a nice thing. And I was also, Catherine was there, Brandy was there, Art, myself, so we had a good time. It was a very nice evening. A lot of things, a lot of activity going on. And then May 29th, we had an airport board meeting, which we went over the usual stuff, and they have 7 inches of that thickness of that runway done right now. So they're going to town on that. We're doing a real good job with that. And that's the end of my reports. Gary, do you have anything for the group?
Yeah, we're happy to report we had a retirement party for a reception for Joe Williams last week. Left us after 12 years of service. And Dan Ellenwood, who was our previous fire inspector, interviewed and was selected as the division chief fire marshal going forward. So that's great. Now we have a fire chief from Missouri and a division chief from North Carolina, so we're getting a definite southeastern flavor to our fire department. Also, on Wednesday, we have the monthly city, county, university, school district meeting. It's a luncheon during the summer. It'll be at the Best Western. It's 12 o'clock. The groundbreaking for the arena is set, I believe, for 11:30 on Thursday on the north field above the Kibbe Dome, so hopefully you can make it to that as well. And with that, we are moving forward. We just finished up today with our budget interviews with the mayor, so we're ready to start putting the final touches on that and bringing it forward for city council and publish it sometime mid-month. and get it ready for the council workshop the second Monday and possibly Tuesday in July.
Okay. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye. I know so we ended. Thank you, everybody.